Why do some teenagers stay quiet? How personality shapes communication during adolescence. Before today, perhaps you'd believed that quietness is something teenagers eventually need to outgrow. Perhaps you've worried because your child wasn't the loudest in the room. Perhaps you'd encouraged them to speak more, join more activities, or become more outgoing. Those intentions usually come from love. But what if we've been asking the wrong question? What if the real question isn't, why is this teenager so quiet? What if the better question is, why does this teenager respond differently from others? Because every day, teenagers sit in the same classrooms, listen to the same teachers, live in the same homes, and experience many of the same situations. Yet, they don't all respond in the same way. Some speak immediately, some think before speaking, some naturally enjoy attention, others quietly observe everything around them. So what explains the difference? Is it confidence? Is it parenting? Or could personality be playing a much bigger role than many of us realize? Today, we're beginning a new conversation, not about changing quiet teenagers, but about understanding them better. Because when understanding comes first, support becomes wiser, and that changes everything. Welcome to Nurture and Thrive Therapy. I am Marianne Ojotule Charles. I am a student counselor at the National Open University of Nigeria. I am a professional counselor, wellness professional, researcher, and human development educator. This month, we're exploring one important question. Why no two teenagers respond the same way? Today, we begin with one of the most misunderstood behaviors in adolescence. Why do some teenagers stay quiet? Is every quiet teenager the same? If you've worked with teenagers for any length of time, you've probably met two young people who were both quiet yet completely different. One hardly spoke during social gatherings or class discussions, but always submitted excellent assignments. Another avoided speaking, avoided group activities, and seemed uncomfortable whenever attention shifted towards them. From a distance, both teenagers looked exactly the same. Both were quiet, but underneath, their experiences could be very different. And this is where many adults unintentionally make mistakes. We sometimes assume that every quiet teenager has the same needs, simply because their behavior looks similar. Research in developmental psychology and personality tells us something different. Behavior is what we see. Personality, on the other hand, helps us understand why we see it. Two teenagers may both remain quiet, yet for completely different reasons. One may naturally prefer observing before speaking. Another may need more time to organize their thoughts before responding. Another may simply gain energy from quiet reflection rather than constant conversation. None of this automatically suggests a problem. They simply reflect different ways of engaging with the world. History offers interesting examples of this. Albert Einstein was often described as thoughtful and reflective, preferring deep thinking over quick conversation. Rosa Parks was known for her calm, quiet strength rather than loud public speeches, yet her courage helped change history. In business, Bill Gates has openly described himself as someone who enjoys reading, thinking deeply, and reflecting before speaking or making decisions. These people were not successful because they were quiet. They were successful because they learned to use the strength that came naturally to them. And that's an important difference. Unfortunately, our society often celebrates the most visible voices. The teenager who confidently speaks, the student who always volunteers, the person who naturally enjoys the spotlight. Those qualities are valuable, but they are not the only qualities that matters. Sometimes, careful observation, deep thinking, patient listening, and thoughtful decision-making become equally powerful strengths. So, before encouraging every quiet teenager to talk more, perhaps we should first ask ourselves, have I taken time to understand how this young person naturally experiences the world? Because support becomes far more effective when understanding comes before advice. The hidden strengths adults often miss in quiet teenagers. If we only notice who speaks the most, we may overlook some of the most important qualities developing quietly in other teenagers. Many naturally quiet teenagers spend more time observing before reacting. They often notice details that others overlook. They think carefully before making decisions. They listen longer before giving opinions. And because they are not constantly trying to be heard, they sometimes become exceptionally good at understanding other people. Research in personality psychology suggests that adolescents who naturally prefer reflection often engage in deeper information processing before responding. That doesn't automatically make them more intelligent than other teenagers, but it often means they approach learning differently. Instead of thinking while they speak, they prefer thinking before they speak. That difference matters, because in today's fast-moving world, we sometimes mistake quick responses for deep understanding. Yet, many important discoveries, carefully planned projects, scientific breakthroughs, and thoughtful decisions have come from people who first paused, observed, and reflected. Think again about Albert Einstein. He wasn't famous because he spoke the fastest. He became influential because he spent years asking difficult questions and thinking deeply about them. Or consider Bill Gates. He has often spoken about the importance of reading, reflection, and taking time to think before making major decisions. These examples remind us of something important. Quietness itself is not a strength, but some strengths are more likely to develop when a young person naturally enjoys reflection, careful observation, and thoughtful analysis. That is why adults should be careful not to reward only the loudest voices. Sometimes the teenager who says the least during a discussion may later produce the most creative solution. Sometimes the student who rarely competes for attention becomes the one classmates quietly depend upon when real help is needed. The challenge is this: those strengths are easy to miss because they do not usually announce themselves. They quietly reveal themselves over time. And if adults never notice them, teenagers may begin believing those strengths have little value. That is a loss, not only for the teenager, but also for the family, the classroom, and the wider community. When quietness is healthy and when it may need support. By now, we've discovered something important. Not every quiet teenager is strongly. Many are simply expressing their personality in a different way. They enjoy meaningful conversation instead of constant conversation. They prefer listening before contributing. They recharge by spending time alone rather than always being around people. Those teenagers usually continue to grow. They learn, they laugh, they build friendships, they pursue interest, they participate when they feel ready. Their quietness doesn't stop them from living, it simply shapes how they live. But there are situations where quietness becomes or begin to tell a different story. Imagine a teenager who once enjoyed spending time with friends, but suddenly begins avoiding everyone. A teenager who previously participated in class, but now withdraws completely. A young person who no longer enjoys hobbies they once loved. Or a teenager whose silence is now accompanied by persistent sadness, hopelessness, overwhelming fear, changes in sleep, changes in appetite, or declining school performance. At that point, the conversation is no longer simply about personality. Something else may also be happening. And that is why adults should avoid two common mistakes. The first mistake is assuming they are just naturally quiet. The second mistake is assuming every quiet teenager must be emotionally distressed. Neither conclusion is helpful. Instead, look for change. Personality is usually consistent. Emotional distress often brings noticeable changes. A natural quiet teenager may still smile, maintain healthy friendships, enjoy favorite activities, and steadily pursue personal goals. But when a teenager begins changing dramatically from their usual pattern, that change deserves gentle attention, not immediate judgment, not panic, not pressure, just caring observation. Because sometimes the most important question is no longer, why is this teenager quiet? The more helpful questions becomes, has this teenager always been this way? Or has something changed? That single question can help parents, teachers, counselors, mentors, and caregivers respond much more wisely. Understanding personality helps us appreciate differences. Paying attention to change helps us recognize when support may be needed, and effective care requires both. How can adults support quiet teenagers without changing who they are? Perhaps one of the greatest gifts we can give a quiet teenager is not confidence, it is understanding. Because confidence grows best in environments where young people feel accepted, not constantly compared. Think about how many times quiet teenagers hear comments like, "Why are you always so quiet? Speak up. Why can't you be more like your brother? You need to become more outgoing." Although these comments are usually well-intentioned, they often communicate an unintended message like, who you naturally are is not enough. And over time, some teenagers begin believing that being accepted requires pretending to be someone else, and that can become emotionally exhausting. Supporting quiet teenagers does not mean leaving them exactly as they are. Growth is still important. Learning communication skill is still important. Building confidence is still very important. But growth should never require abandoning personality. Instead of asking, how can I make this teenager talk more? Try asking, how can I make this teenager feel safe enough to contribute in their own way? That one change in perspective transform the relationship for parents. Create opportunities for conversation that does not always happen face to face. Parents are to create opportunities for conversation that don't always happen face to face. Some quiet teenagers open up more during a walk, while driving together with your parents, or while helping with simple household activities. Now for teachers, remember that participation is bigger than speaking. Some students demonstrate understanding through thoughtful written work, carefully completed projects, or consistent attention during lesson. Recognizing those contributions tells quiet students that your voice matters even when it sounds different. And now for counselors and mentors. Avoid interpreting silence too quickly. Silence can mean many things. It may mean a teenager is thinking, reflecting, processing emotions, or simply deciding whether the environment feels safe enough to speak. Patience often reveals more than pressure. And for friends, don't mistake a quiet personality for a lack of interest. Some of the strongest friendships are built not on constant conversation but on trust, consistency, and genuine understanding. Supporting quiet teenager is not about lowering expectations. It is about creating different pathways for them to succeed. Because when teenagers feel understood, they become more willing to grow. Not because they were forced to change, but because they discovered they were already accepted. The greatest mistake adults can make. Perhaps the greatest mistake we can make as adults is believing that understanding teenagers begins with changing them. It doesn't. Understanding begins with curiosity. The moment we stop asking, why isn't this teenager like everyone else? And begin asking, why is this teenager trying to show me? Or what is this teenager trying to show me about who they are? Our relationship begins to change because personality are not problems to solve. They are differences to understand. Some teenagers would always think before speaking. Some will always prefer listening before responding. Some will always choose meaningful conversations over many conversations. That doesn't make them less capable. It simply means they contribute differently. Imagine how many teenagers would flourish if they grew up in homes, schools, and communities where being different was not treated as being defective. Imagine how many gifts the world would discover if adults learned to recognize quiet strengths before trying to replace them with louder behaviors. Perhaps the next thoughtful scientist, ethical leader, creative designer, careful researcher, or compassionate counselor is already sitting quietly in the classroom today. Not because they have nothing to offer, but because nobody has yet recognized the value they already carry. And maybe after today's conversation, one more teenager will finally be understood, not because they changed, but because an adult chose to see them differently. If today's conversation has helped you see quiet teenagers differently, share this video with a parent, a teacher, a counselor, a mentor, or anyone who works with young people. Together, we can build environments where every personality has the opportunity to grow. I am Marianne Ojotule Charles. Thank you for learning with me on Nurture and Thrive Therapy. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us in our next episode, where we'll explore another important question: why do some teenagers express everything they feel? Until then, remember, different personalities deserve equal opportunities to grow. Thanks for being with us on this one, and see you again soon. Bye for now.